10 of the toughest politicians in Washington, D.C. And I asked some friends today and said, you know, when we talk about Congressman Huelskamp, give me one word, which is very hard, by the way. Some of the words that we heard was integrity, principle, courageous, brave, tough, Christian, conservative, ambassador, constitutionally driven, that was one. Passionate, and loyal. And what I also like, Jenny Walls sent me this statement. Congressman TimHuelskamp told us what he would do when he got to D.C. We liked what he said. It was perfectly aligned with our conservative principles. He went to D.C. and did exactly what he said he would do. He didn't just paw-talk to those yahoos in D.C. For that, we conservative Kansans are grateful for this man who stands by his word. Tim has endured much on our behalf. We thank him for what he has done and who he is. And I have a plaque here tonight that I want to give you from our Patriot Freedom Alliance. Let me read what it has here. In appreciation and admiration to Congressman TimHuelskamp, special recognition from your fellow Kansans for outstanding leadership, true grit representation. You are relentless and a patriotic spirit of dedication, commitment, and protection toward our individual liberties, religious freedom, and the Constitution of the United States of America. Please accept our deepest gratitude.
Thank you so much, and I'm terribly honored by that award, and I thank you for letting me be here. I want to thank you for being here so regularly. It does make a difference. But a little warning here, my 11-year-old son, Ethan, is with me here. I did ask him as we got out of the vehicle, I said, son, what is my speech for tonight? He shook his head. And so we were going to have to wing it a little bit, right, son, and try to cover a few things in a few minutes. And but one word that wasn't on the list that came to me about 2 years ago to the month, and that's the word foolish. Because oftentimes, I think in real life, and sometimes in Washington, the line between courageous and foolish seems awfully narrow. It came to mind, it was about, again, 2 years ago to the month that I was on the House floor on Monday. I've been home as I come home every weekend and home on the weekend, walked in on Monday evening, and Mike Pence met me on the floor. You know, I never met Mike Pence before I got to Washington, and numerous other, I think, real conservative leaders I just admired from a distance. Mike Pence walked up to me and said, well, Tim, he told me my first name. Wow, that's something. And he said, I want to just tell you, what you did last weekend was the most courageous thing I've seen in my entire congressional career. That's when I said, oh my gosh, what did I do? and all I did was say, hey, you know what? Because Republicans are going to talk about balancing our budget and actually cutting spending, we probably shouldn't do that. And I said that publicly, which was the beginning, I guess, of some of my mistakes in Washington, is actually saying what I think, which is usually what I'm hearing you tell me at home. And that's the way our system was found, which makes us so unusual. So unusual. I've done 160 town halls, and I had a question today from a reporter, a pretty liberal reporter in Ellsworth. Someone got me here to do this report in Ellsworth. And then Congressman Huelskamp, you asked, you sent out a survey, an email yesterday, and asked, what are your opinions on the issue of marriage, traditional marriage? And she said, now, the reporter said, what if it came back and most Kansans, in response to your survey, decided marriage was something other than a man and a woman? She said, well, what are you going to do with that? I said, well, number one, I don't think that's going to be the response. But number two, I said, man, you have to understand. Her name is Lynn. You have to understand, when you run for office and you tell somebody you're going to do something, and you have something called a principle, you don't change it because of a little survey. And you certainly don't change it because somebody in Washington tells you to change it. That's called a principle. And we can compromise numbers. We can compromise different policies, but at the end of the day, there are principles. There are constitutional principles on which we were founded. And far too many people in Washington, and also sometimes in our own lives, we stray away from principles and get caught up in trying to figure out the answers when usually they're pretty darn clear. And Linda was a little confused at the newspaper. She probably will know that for certain tomorrow when she prints her editorial. Says TimHuelskamp refuses to compromise. He promises one thing, and my gosh, he's going to do the same thing he told us he would do. Think about that. I often joke that I like to start a Mark Twain caucus in Washington, D.C. And if you come from a family like mine, every few years you have a family reunion. Every few years, an uncle gets up and says, you know what, we're related to. So it's about 20 years ago. They all said we were related to Mark Twain. True story. In our family reunion, he was our 12th cousin 64 times removed. I can't remember what the story was. And Mark Twain once said, he said, do the right thing. It will gratify some people, and it will astonish the rest. You know, we need folks in Washington. We need folks in our city, county, and state level that are actually going to astonish us by doing what they said they would do. And I tell you, I'm a Republican, and oftentimes Republicans say one thing, which is usually what we want to hear, and then you get worried. When you go to Washington, you see different things. And what I've attempted to do in Washington, and I'm sure I've fallen short, and my wife's not here to correct me, but she'll probably say that is the case, but it's following through on what we said we do. And what we said we do in Washington, what I said I do as a conservative, I start with that little document called the Constitution. You know, we read it once every 2 years. Can you imagine that? Once every 2 years. We even read it on the floor. Wow. And every bill that comes through the House side has a little statement of constitutional principles. Where do you get that authority to pass that bill?
Well, what we found out, the same clauses in 90% of the bills. The same ones under Obamacare that said that anything goes.
Republicans said we're going to follow the Constitution, and we always use the same phrase we don't like liberal courts to use as well. But the point here is this, that we have a beautiful Constitution. We have a tremendous heritage as a nation. And I think it's tremendous. You start the day with prayer, and you know what? We do that in Congress too. Anybody, of course you do that. Every day in Congress, they start with a prayer. The courts haven't taken that out. But you know what? I was going on taking a nighttime tour of some constituents. And we went to the House floor. It was about 7 o'clock at night, and they said, oh my gosh, you mean it says, in God we trust? Something written in a public stone, and they didn't cover it up? I said, well, yeah, they didn't cover it up, except for the first State of the Union address from the President of the United States, the current president. They did try to cover that up, but you couldn't see it in the camera. But a couple things I do want to talk about tonight. People ask about number one is it all over? Is it too late? It is not. It is not too late for our nation. Do not lose hope. And I tell you, I tend to lose hope in Washington, D.C. I really do. I really do, which is why I come home every chance I get. And you know what? Because I come home and I see people like you, people all across this city, and indeed around the nation, that have told me, Tim, you know what? What do we have to do? What do we have to do to solve this problem? Reminds me of the time 3 weeks ago, the president came into the Republican Congress, and he gave up. He said he wasn't going to give us any speeches, but after 15 minutes later, we kind of got started talking about a few issues. It came out that meeting, and by the way, the best thing that did come out of the meeting was they announced a new Pope while we were in there. That was the meeting. Who would have thought the President of the United States would make that announcement? But we walked out of there, and the reporter shoved a microphone. Congressman, do you think the President was sincere? Do you think the President was sincere?